What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on the Learn Linux series, and today we're going to talk about the question which I've heard countless times from countless people, and that is, what distro should I learn first? Which distro should I choose to get started with Linux? And other questions similar to this one. And well, I'm here to say that the answer to this question is simply, it does not matter. There's an asterisk there, and we'll talk about that in a second. But for the most part, when you're learning Linux, and you're generally talking about learning the command line. That's what most people think about when they're talking about learning Linux. In terms of the GUI, you kind of can just click around and figure it out. It's not very different from any other operating systems such as Mac OS or Windows. It's pretty self-explanatory. You click on the browser, you click on the file browser when you want to look for files, right-click when you want to delete a file. Nothing much really changes. Now, in terms of the command line, for the most part, most of the tools and all of the distros tend to be, for the most part, the same at a core level. There's generally core utils you will find utils, certain GNU tools, such as the compilers, Python you will generally see on most machines. There's certain things which are pretty consistent throughout most Linux distros, meaning that whatever distro you pick to learn with, it will generally have the same tools as any other distro, which might be more quote-unquote beginner friendly. So along with that, if let's say looks is a problem for you, maybe you like the way a certain distro looks, like I know a lot of people like to use, for example, Garuda Linux because it looks nice, it's themed nice, it's already preset up. However, if let's say you pick some other distro such as Linux Mint, it's not to say that you can't make Linux Mint look exactly like Garuda Linux looks like. As we said before in the previous video, you can install whatever desktop environment you want. You can customize it however you want. So the base is just those tools at the bottom, and that's what's really important. And with any distro that you pick, you will have them for learning. Now, the reason I have the asterisk there is that while all distros are technically equal for learning, there are some which are more or less beginner friendly for learning. So, for example, there's differences when it comes to installing and managing the OS or the software. So a system like Arch, Gentoo, LFS, Slackware, very, very difficult, arguable of course, but difficult in terms of as a beginner to install, because you do not understand certain core concepts of how Linux work. So it's going to be difficult for you to truly be able to set it up and get initially started, and it can lead to frustration, which can lead you to quitting Linux and saying it's too hard. And you don't want that experience. Or for example, right, with Gentoo, you have to compile all your software. You don't just download some binary and click run or something to install it. When it comes to support, it's going to be a lot harder to find support for a distro that only 100 or 200 or 2,000 people use versus something like Ubuntu, which several thousands of people throughout the world use and have made countless posts about. They have their own forums and things like that, their own communities where people are always helping, and most likely will find an answer to the question that you have. And of course, finally, some distros are purpose-built to serve a certain function. So let's say Kali is meant for pen testing for the most part. Or for example, there's Remnux and Sift, which are built for malware analysis and security and DFIR. So there's also those things which have a bunch of tools, and we'll talk about that in a second. But those are also just less beginner friendly for the most part, simply because of the way they're built in. So take Kali, right? Why not Kali? Why not Parrot? Again, they're packed with a bunch of tools, and realistically, that's what makes them special. It's all those tools that they come with. They're already configured. They're already set up. But if you're trying to learn Linux, you want to learn Linux, not learn the tools. The tools, you can also learn them on Windows. A lot of them, they're pretty much pre-installed on Windows. You're just learning how to use somebody else's tool, not learning how to use Linux. And that will make more sense later on as the course goes on. But like, for example, Bash. Learning how to run an Nmap scan will not help you get better at Bash. Secondly, it's not built for stability and home use. I can't tell you how many countless times throughout the last 4 or 5 years I've updated my Kali distro in my VM and it breaks. Like, breaks in a way that I've never seen any other distro really break. And it's because it's not really meant to be used as a stable OS. It's not intended for home use. And while Parrot, of course, has a home use version, it is an exception to the rule in this case. And also, things are configured in certain ways, and it's not going to be the standard thing you'll see. So for example, Kali, up until recently, had the default user be the root user out of the box. That's not very normal to see out in the real world. And finally, it's like you have a McLaren, right? And you're driving around without a driver's license because you don't know how to drive. And because you don't know how to drive, you're driving it at 5 miles per hour. So you have all this power, all these tools, all these things, but you don't really know how to take full advantage of them. So what's the point of having them when you can just have a starter car, learn how to drive, get used to it, and then move up to the McLaren? Now, of course, we have to talk about Windows Subshell for Linux. And if you don't know what Windows Subshell for Linux is, it's basically a Microsoft put in the Linux kernel into the Windows operating system, and with some help from Hyper-V and a few other things, it allows you to basically run a pseudo Linux operating system within your Windows system. So you can, similar as you can open a command prompt or a PowerShell prompt, you can now open up a Ubuntu bash prompt, and that will essentially be a Ubuntu operating system within Windows which you can play with. That being said, for our purposes of learning, and at least for the purposes of this course, I do not recommend that you use that. It's not going to provide us experience with certain scenarios. So for example, file systems, if we start to make a partition and add storage and things like that, it's going to be complicated on WSL because it's not a full implementation of Linux. There's some things which aren't really implemented the same way as they would be implemented in a VM because it's not a VM. And of course, differences in functionality, but also in errors. So let's say you try to run a command that I tell you to run, and you get some weird error or wrong output that shouldn't be there. It's going to be difficult to debug that. WSL is a relatively new thing, and if you're spending your time debugging problems that exist simply because you're using WSL, you will not be progressing in your learning, and you'll just be stuck. It's better to have a clean environment where you know that things are just going to work right, and a VM is going to provide you the best opportunity for that. So we will be using a VM for this course, and more specifically, we will be using Debian in a VM for this course. Or if you have a actual machine, you can install it on there as well. In a VM, at first it's a little bit better because you can get used to things, but if you have a spare machine, you can do that as well. Debian is lightweight. It's very, very lightweight. It's one of the original distros as we saw before. It's very well supported, very well documented. You can find information about it anywhere. And I mean, even if you find information on Ubuntu, a lot of it sometimes will be compatible with Debian because Ubuntu is based on Debian, or was originally based on Debian. If you're likely to encounter it in the real world, so there's a lot of companies that use Debian in their systems. A lot of companies will use either Debian or one of its variants such as Ubuntu, or Red Hat or one of its variants such as CentOS, or I guess now Rocket Linux is starting to pop up and other branches off from there. We will not be using a GUI, so at first you won't have to worry about picking how it looks or anything like that. Those are going to just be distractions. We're only going to learn on what we call the TTY, where we'll learn a little bit about that later. But there's not going to be a GUI, and we will build up to installing the GUI on the system, and that will be near the end of the course, or near the middle of the course. Not really sure yet. And of course, you're free to follow loosely with any distro you would want to pick. However, there's an asterisk, because if you do that, be ready to do your own research, be ready to do your own troubleshooting, because there will be differences. There will be differences in how you install software, how you configure software. Certain things may not be pre-configured. For example, if I install some software on Ubuntu, it might come up with a pre-configured templated config, versus I install it on something like Debian, there might not be that, or something like Arch. You're not going to get the same kind of template. There might not be any at all. You might have to make your own config, or look for the default config for Debian and copy that over. So there's a lot of little differences which you will have to figure out, and it's actually a really good method if you want to I guess learn more. You'll be able to, you have an opportunity to truly put your research skills to the test, and potentially learn more do recommend that you follow along closely with what I'm doing, and that will be using Debian. Anyways, next video we will talk about how to really learn Linux, what it really means to learn Linux, and we'll go over that. But for now, take care and see you next time.